Hi everyone. Lesson we're going to sketch out some ideas to make ourselves a garden gnome. So, kind of a common decoration in gardens. It's a little gnome character. He's wearing a pointy hat. Usually it's a beard. And can be holding like a gardening tool or something. But intended, it's kind of looking like a little wizard here, to just stand out in the garden, being a little decoration that sometimes you'll notice hiding among your plants. And it's a good design for something to be easy to print, because if we have him have a little robe that goes all the way to the ground, we don't have to worry about supporting delicate legs or anything like that. So you can see right away that he's going to be able to be made out of a lot of spheres maybe for his hands, and cones for these sleeves and hat and beard. And we'll probably give him like a belt. Now that we have an idea of our shapes that we're going to use for the design, we'll head on over to TinkerCAD and start putting them together. We are going to design our 3D printable garden gnome figure, similar to this guy. We're going to make him out of basic shapes and design him so that his bottom here is a large flat area, so that he's not easy to tip over and he's easier to print. And we'll make sure that all of his shapes slope upwards so that he doesn't have any crazy overhangs, and we can probably print him without any supports. So let's take our example guy and move him off to the back. And let's start fresh. I'm going to drag out, this time, all of the shapes that I'm going to need. So, his head and hands are going to be spheres, along with his eyes. And since I want my spheres to be as smooth as possible, I'm going to increase the number of steps out there. And for this, I'm going to give it a different color. So now this is going to be head and hands there. And we are going to go down. We could use a cone for shapes like his coat and his hat, but I like the curve rather than the sharpness of the cone. So I'm going to go down to the paraboloid. We're going to make sure that this is also at the highest number of steps here. And I'll turn this blue for his coat. And then we are going to need some feet here, and to make them flat on the bottom without having to use multiple shapes to cut them, I'm going to use the half sphere. And we'll say his shoes are red. So we've got a couple of things that are flat on the bottom. And we're going to build his arms out of the same shapes. And even his nose. The only thing missing, I think, is his belt, which, to give him a belt, we're going to need a cylinder. And we also can turn the number of sides up on the cylinder so that it's as smooth as possible. So I think those are the shapes that we're going to need. So I'll put this cylinder off to the side, so I don't know where his belt is going to go yet. And we'll start by making the main body and feet. Move our sphere out of the way. And I'm going to make this body, this thing, taller. I want it to be bigger all the way around, not just taller. So I'm going to hold down Shift on the keyboard and drag one of the handles up so that the whole thing becomes bigger. And we don't need to worry about exactly how big he is until we get to the stage of printing to see how long it's going to take and to make sure that he fits in the printer. For now, I'm just going to make the sizes to the shape that I want them to be. So we'll make his feet a little smaller here, and we'll rotate around. Always keep in mind the view from other sides. You can use the cube up here, or you can right-click and drag to move your view around. That way you can make sure that your design looks good from all sides. Alright, I'm going to make one side of this guy at a time, and we'll flip all the things that need to be the same over to the other side. So it's his hands and feet for now. And I'd like his foot to be facing out a little bit. Let's zoom in here so that it makes it easier to use our rotate handle. And click on the rotate handle. Remember that outside the circle, it goes 1 degree at a time, and inside it snaps to these markers. And that can be very handy in case you want to return to a straight 90 degrees. So if I move it 1 marker to the side, it's 22.5 degrees. I know that if I want to change it again, I know I can move it 1 marker back the other way. So I like that. And then we're going to make him some arms. So we're going to make our hands a similar size to our feet. We'll hold down Shift and shrink this sphere in. We'll look at it compared to the foot. It seems good. And it's going to need a arm there, the sleeve of his coat. So I'm going to take the coat paraboloid here and hit duplicate and repeat. We'll move this over here, and looking at it from the top, I'm going to shrink it in until it's just a little bit bigger than the hand. And we will shrink it down a little bit here. Now that's covering up the hand entirely, I'm going to grab our up and down arrow here and move it up. So we just have the hand sticking out of the bottom of our sleeve. And once I like how this looks, I'm going to group these two together. I'm going to go ahead and select both of them by dragging this box that touches both of them, making sure I don't get anything else in there. You can also select multiple things by clicking on it, holding down Shift, and clicking on the second one. So I've got 2 shapes selected here. I'm going to click on Group. And it'll take a default color, but you can click on this and turn it to multicolor. And now I can see the colors that I picked so that I remember what I want to paint him as once he's done. Now we're going to get our arm into position. So I'm going to lift it up with our up and down arrow, and move it over to kind of where I want it. And now we're going to use rotate from the top. So you can see 2 rotate tools floating above here. So sometimes it'll take a little bit of effort to figure out which one is the one you need to use. I'm going to also turn it just 1 step in and see if that's enough. I'll move it closer to the body so that the whole thing is stuck inside of the body. And I don't have to worry about the top here because that's going to be covered up by his head. I just want this to look right, like it's a sleeve and a hand. And I think that looks pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and duplicate this and the foot and flip them over to the other side. So let's hold down Shift and select our foot. We'll duplicate them, and we'll go all the way over to the other side and click on Mirror. And now Mirror will change our handles into these left and right, back and forth arrows. You can see that whichever arrow you put it over, that's the direction it's going to flip it. So I'm going to flip it left to right. Now I have a set that is facing the opposite direction, but I need to put it on the other side. So just so that I don't accidentally move it back and forth, I'm going to use the arrow keys on the keyboard to just move it to the right until it's sticking out of the other side of our coat. So now we've got some feet and some hands, and since I grouped this hand into the thing, I don't have my sphere over here, so I have to drag out a new one. But if I wanted to keep the shapes that I wanted and reuse them, I should always duplicate first and then use that as part of my object. So I'm going to turn this back to our full number of steps here so it's nice and smooth. And we're going to make this the head. Well, we're going to duplicate it actually so that I have a spare sphere over here in case I need it. And we're going to raise this up and put it on top of the body. So now we can see that's much too small for his head. So we're going to go ahead and increase the size by holding down Shift and grabbing one of the handles, just dragging it up until we like the size of his head. All right. And looking around on the side, it looks like his head should come forward a little bit. There we go. Now his head is going to need some details. So we're going to want a hat, his face itself, and his beard. But before we do that, I think I want to get his belt and the rest of his body on there. And just to make him a little more fat, just round there, we're going to put another sphere here in his body so that he isn't just a cone. Let's go ahead and take spare one over here and we'll turn it blue so it matches the coat. And we'll make it a little taller. Stick it in his body so that he's just got a little bit of a belly sticking out here. And I think we can make it a little wider. And if we want it to become wider in both directions at once, we can hold down Alt and drag one side. You can see that it makes the other side move at the same time. Remember, if we hold Shift, it's going to move all of the handles at once. But if we hold Alt, it's just going to move the opposite side handle at the same time. All right, stretch it back a little bit. And now he's got a belly. So let's take our cylinder, and this is the only place we need to use it. So I'm going to just shrink it down so it's going to be more of a belt. I want to put it right in the middle of his belly. So let's go ahead and make this thing a little bit bigger. And then hold down Shift, click on the sphere here, and click on the Align tool. Align will show us some circles here. You can tell where it's going to put them when you hover over it. It's going to either line them up to one edge or to the middle. By default, it's in between the two objects, so it would move them both. That's not what I want to do. I want to move this one over to the sphere. So if I click on the sphere, then all of my handles move over to the sphere. And now, when I put it in the middle here, it's going to move our cylinder to the middle. We'll go on the middle up and down, and we'll click on the middle here. So now we have our belt stuck directly in the middle of our body there. That's looking good, although I think it sticks out a little bit too much. So I'm going to click on an empty space, click on the belt again, and I can use the arrow keys to just nudge it back a millimeter. That's just a nice little detail there. All right. Now that he's got a belt, we're going to need to give him a face and a hat. So we can start with the hat by just duplicating our coat. So I'm going to click on Duplicate on the body, and we're going to click on our up and down arrow and drag it up. Let's move our view with the middle mouse button. You can move your view up and down, left and right. And drag this up till it's on top of his head. Now that hat is far too large, so let's go ahead and hold down Shift and click on our middle handle here and shrink it down so it's just about as wide as his head. Oh, it's a little bit shorter in that direction. So we'll stretch it out. And I'll move it forward. We don't want this to overhang too much. If you made a big wide-brimmed hat, you would have a big flat area that is an overhang that needs supports. And for our plan, we want only the tiniest bits of overhangs, like the belt here and the hat, so that we only have one layer where it is a little bit out from the edge. Now that we've got our hat, I'll change its color and give him a face. So we need some spheres for the eyes. We'll go ahead and duplicate the head. And I'll grab this handle here and hold down Shift so we can make it smaller and push it forward at the same time. And we'll give him some kind of eye color so that, there we go, got purple eyes now. And raise it up. Now that eye is definitely huge and popping out of his head. So we're going to have to zoom in a little bit so we can see it better. And then I can hold down Shift and just shrink down my eye until I think it is in the right place. Use my arrow keys to move it left and right. And I'll use my up and down arrow here. Now I think we have a pretty good eye. Let's zoom out, make sure it looks good compared to the rest of the face. I think I'll move it in a little bit more. There we go. And we're going to duplicate this eye. Oops. And it looks like I've made another even smaller eye right on top of the eye. So let's delete that one, because duplicate and repeat will repeat the last couple of moves that you did if you're still selecting the same object. So I want to click on an empty space, then click on the eye again. I can duplicate it and then use my arrow keys to move it over to the other side. Perfect. I'll make his nose and his beard out of the same shape as his hat. So we'll start with the hat here. I'll duplicate it, zoom out a bit, and then we'll drag it down to the level where we want his nose sticking out. And then we'll go ahead and shrink it. So we're going to push it forward. And since I don't need it to be exactly the same shape, I don't have to worry about holding down Shift, but I do want to use Alt to put the sides in both in the same amount. So if I use Alt, I can drag the sides in, and now it stays in the middle. Now if you accidentally move it out of the middle or you stretch it out on one side only, you can always go back to the Align tool, hold down Shift, click on the head, click on Align, and then we can put the nose right in the center. Now I'm going to click on an empty space, click on the nose by itself, and let's not make it so tall. Make it stick out a little bit more. Oh, that's quite huge. Make it the same color as his head. And lastly, we don't want the nose to be a big overhang that will have to have a support. So we're going to rotate it so that it is a slope that goes upwards. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this and move the nose up one notch. And this guy's got a pretty big nose, but I think it looks fun. So we'll use that. Lastly, we're going to give him a beard, which will round out his face a bit. So I'm going to click on the hat again. We're going to duplicate it. And I'm just going to move it down to where I want the beard to start. Oops, click on that hat, click on that little up and down arrow. You can also move things up and down by holding down Control on the keyboard and using the up and down arrow keys. So now for this trick, I want the beard, the bottom edge or the top edge of the beard, to be right there underneath the nose. So I'm going to leave the bottom of the hat there, even though this looks terribly wrong. We'll zoom out a bit. I'm going to grab this up and down, or not up and down, the height handle, where I can make it taller or shorter. And I'm going to go all the way down past the bottom and out the other side to make it longer on the underside. So now it just kind of looks like he has a collar, which might be a fun way to make him. I'm going to turn this into a beard. So let's grab the back side and drag it forward so the whole thing is shorter. And let's use our Alt on our keyboard and drag the sides in so that it is a little narrower than his face. And then we're going to go back up to our Rotate tool and drag it over one notch, just like all of our other things. And now that I've rotated it in, it's tilted inside his head, so I'm going to use my arrow keys to just nudge it out until it is sticking out of the front of his body. Alright, this guy's got quite a long beard going on. And let's give it a different color so that his beard is not the same as his hat. Give him a gray beard like my other example. So our little gnome guy is pretty much done, but I think that this eye needs to go 1 more millimeter over to the side. There we go. I think that he needs a smile, so he is a friendly gnome. And to do that, I'm going to have to get one more shape that I forgot to get. So I'm going to cut this little happy face out of his beard. So let's go down our list and find our round roof. And if we put the round roof down on the floor, because it has the flat side down, it's actually a frowny face, so we're going to have to turn that over. We could use the Rotate tool, or we could just use Mirror and flip it upside down. And now I want my smile here to be a hole that I'm cutting out of the beard, so I'll turn it into a hole. And then I'm going to hold down Shift, click on the beard, and we'll use our Align tool to get it closer to where we want it to be. So we'll click on Align, and then click on the beard. Then we can line our smile up to the beard, put it right in the middle this way, right in the middle. And now we're getting close to where we want it to be. So let's click on an empty space, click on our hole again, and we'll use our arrow keys to move it forward so that we're only going to cut into partway through the beard. And now we're going to make it small enough that it fits inside there. I'm going to zoom in using the F key or Fit to selected shapes. I'm going to go ahead and hold down Shift, shrink this whole mouth shape down so it fits on the beard. Now that's quite a bit too low for a mouth, so let's raise it up. And just like all of our other shapes, I'm going to want to go to the side here, grab our Rotate tool, and snap it over one notch so it lines up with all of our slopes. And I'm going to use my arrow keys to move this in so that it goes partway into the beard. That's looking good. Now let's find out if this cut looks right. So I'll hold down Shift, click on the beard shape, click on Group, and we'll see how our cut works. That's pretty nice. Now we can see a little bit of the face color in here, but remember the colors are just for you to see how it may look when it's done. Kind of printers that we usually can use can only handle one color of plastic at a time. So we're going to be painting this at the end. I think it's looking good. So now I have a slightly different gnome. This very large purple eyes. It's quite happy. We can go ahead and select everything and group it together all at once. And now our figurine will be one single shape that we can export and slice. And I'll show you how that works. We are going to export our Garden Gnome figure and prepare him for printing. We can take a last look around, make sure that our project doesn't have any gaps in it or doesn't look weird from the backside. And we're going to take our shape and export. Make sure that it's only the selected shape. I don't want my other design in there at the same time. And we'll click on STL. And once TinkerCAD generates an STL file for us and downloads, we're going to head over to Cura. Now we're using Cura, but you might be using another slicer to try this out. You'll be able to find the same settings in it. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I've got the printer that I want to use set up and the plastic that I am using. And we're going to open up our Garden Gnome. And at this point, we're going to make sure that our Garden Gnome is the size that we actually want it to print. We'll take a look at how changing our size changes the amount of plastic and print time that we have to do. So let's take a look at our gnome moving around and making sure it's perfectly flat on the bottom. The blue highlight means that these surfaces are touching the floor. And the red highlight is surfaces that face down but don't have anything underneath them. So we can see that the sleeves and the bottom of the hands, underside of the nose, that kind of thing, belt there, they're facing down. So we could print this guy with supports around him to keep all of these up, but since, aside from the belt's underside, they are all a nice slope, I think we can try printing this guy without supports, especially if he's very small. So if we turn off our supports, and we just go ahead and hit slice, we're going to see he will take 2.5 hours at the size he is, which, let's just double check that. He is 80 millimeters tall. Not too big for a garden gnome. He would be very easy to hide among a very small garden. And if you wanted him to be much larger, then we'll see how big we can make him before it becomes a ridiculous amount of hours. But first, let's double check that our shapes are all going to print the way that we expect them. So if I go ahead and scroll down on our layers, we have a spot here where his hat is just a bit out from his head. So right there, when we hit that layer, it's going to draw this circle wider than his head. It doesn't have any support, which means we might have a little bit of a bad edge there. And we have the same issue going on with our nose, although the nose looks a lot better since it slopes upwards. You can see that at this layer, it's all connected to the beard. As we go up, the next layer just barely sticks out over the edge of the layer before it. So when you go out just one line forward, then you don't have a lot of drooping down there. But the bottom edges of all of our things that are facing down are not going to come out as clean as the top edges. We could actually make these bottom facing edges a lot smoother if we increased the detail, which is to say we shrink the layer height. So each layer we go up 0.2 millimeters, and then we draw a next one out, do our overhang on our nose. So if we went down to our highest detail and sliced it again, we'll see that we've doubled, or more than doubled, the time that it takes to print him, since we have made our layer height so much smaller. We're going to be doing 666 layers. So if we go down here to the nose, we can see that on the nose, we are drawing our layers, so many more layers so that they come out just a tiny bit each time. And that will make the underside a little bit smoother. Although since it's the underside of our design, it seems like it's not worth it to double the time just to make the underside a little smoother. So let's go back to our standard resolution here. And let's see what would happen if we increase the size of him. Remember that this guy, at his less than 100 millimeters, he was still going to take 2 hours to print. So if we click on him and we increase his size, let's double his size. We'll make it 200%. So now he's 160 millimeters tall, a more substantial little garden gnome, and he still easily fits in this printer. Now if we slice him, even though we made him twice as big, he's actually going to be exponentially longer to print. Just making him twice as tall actually gives him squares his actual volume. So we're going to be using 50 meters of plastic and taking 13 hours and 14 minutes to print it. Now if we wanted to print a larger thing faster, we can lower our resolution, making our layer height taller. We could even lower the amount of infill, but that might make some of the upper areas a little bit brittle because there wouldn't be as much infill to hold them up. You can lower the amount of infill and turn on this interesting feature here for gradual infill that increases the amount of infill as it gets closer to the top. So let's see if those affect our time very much. You can see we cut like 3 hours off of it with that. So you can play around with the settings to see how efficient you can print, but like every print that you do, it is kind of an experiment. So trying out interesting settings can be a really neat way. You can see how the infill gets a little bit more complicated as it gets closer to the edges, and much, much wider as it just fills in the middle. So we use up a lot less material, 31 meters, but not that much less time. I encourage you to try out settings on your slicer and see what kind of interesting things they would do and find out how your prints turn out.